Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our Bible study. We're in Esther chapter 6 today, and this chapter, I would say, is kind of a classic. It's humorous in some ways, but very profound in other ways. So let's go ahead and get into it. Not a super long chapter. As you've noticed, a lot of the chapters in Esther are a little bit on the shorter size, verse count-wise. Our timeline here is pretty much the same. So Esther became queen of Persia about 479 BC. There's a hint, at least that to me suggests in this chapter, that this may have been a decent amount of time after Esther became queen, and I'll bring that up as we go through our outline. But again, we don't have any definite numbers on how long exactly Esther had been queen before these events took place. I think for our main characters, everything remains the same, so we can go through these pretty quickly. We have King Ahasuerus. He's the king of Persia. We have Esther, who is his queen. She was a Jewish woman, but she has kept her heritage secret, which comes into play in this chapter and the future chapters. We have Mordecai. He was a Jew who lived in Susa. He was the cousin of Esther, and he raised Esther because she was an orphan after her parents died. We have Haman, who is our evil guy. He's an Agagite. He was a vengeful man. He's a very elevated man in the government of Persia, and he's on a plot to kill Mordecai. We talked about that in the last chapter. And then we have Zeresh, who we were introduced to in chapter 5. That is Haman's wife. She'll come up again. And I bet you could probably guess where we're going to be for our map. We're not going anywhere. Again, today we are going to be in Susa, which was the capital of Persia, over towards the right edge of the map on the PDF. Today I've broken our 14 verses down into 3 different sections. The first one is verses 1 through 3, a sleepless night and the book of memorable deeds. So if you remember from the last chapter, Haman was planning to kill Mordecai in the morning. His wife had given him this advice, and she had said, build a big gallows, and you can hang Mordecai on these gallows in the morning. And, Haman thought he was in a really good position with the king and the queen because he had been invited to Esther's private feast. So he's like, surely the king will grant my request and let me kill Mordecai. So that's the setup for this chapter. And we'll see how that plan works out for him. So he was planning to kill Mordecai, but that night, the king couldn't sleep. Ahasuerus couldn't sleep. So he asked someone to read to him. The chosen book was the, quote, book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, according to verse 1. And in this book was a record of how Mordecai had saved King Ahasuerus from the violent plot that was devised by 2 of his eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh. We already talked about that, remember, in chapter 2, the very end of chapter 2? Ahasuerus asked his servants what reward Mordecai had been given for saving him, and the servants responded that he hadn't received a reward. I mentioned in the timeline that there was a detail here that suggests, at least to me, that some time had passed, and it's this one here. Mordecai, or the King Ahasuerus, pulls out these records of events that had occurred in the past, and he reads about Mordecai and what he had done for him. And now this just happened in chapter 2, but it seems like, maybe there's a suggestion here that there's some time that has passed since this event in chapter 2, and this reading, a reminder of it in chapter 6. Kind of a little bit of speculation, just what the way that the text reads suggests to me. All right, so here is the great part of this chapter, verses 4 through 13. And once again, we see this story playing out much like a movie. Mordecai is honored in verses 4 through 13. Not long after the king was reminded of Mordecai's noble deed, Haman entered the court. So evidently it's morning now, and he is entering the court to ask permission to go hang Mordecai on this new gallows that he's built. When he enters into the king's presence, Ahasuerus asks Haman a question. He says, what should be done to the man who the king delights to honor? So he wants to honor somebody. And Haman's like, oh man, who could the king want to honor except me? I've been invited to all these private dinners. Like, surely he's talking about me. And so thinking that the king was talking about him, Haman dreams up this really, elaborate kind of recognition for what he believes is himself. He says this, quote, let the royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. That's verses 8 through 9. Now the king really liked this idea, and he told Haman to go at once and to do all of these things for Mordecai as a reward for him saving the king from that violent plot a while back, because Mordecai was the man who the king wanted to honor. Now, the text doesn't tell us what Haman's initial response to this is. I would have loved to see it, but Haman, who, he has to obey the orders of the king, he has to go out and do this. So he follows the king's instructions. He dresses Mordecai, this man who he absolutely loathes more than anyone in the entire world, in royal robes, and then he parades him through the square of the city in honor. And afterwards, he goes home to his wife to pout about it. And I think at this point, everyone who's reading this story is really thrilled at this scene, because Haman is just a guy you kind of love to hate. The final section in this chapter is just the last verse, verse 14, which is really a setup for the next chapter, Esther's second feast. So while Haman is at home pouting, talking to his wife and his friends, a servant of the king comes to collect him to attend Esther's second feast. Remember, because it's now the next day, and he has been invited to this second feast where Esther is going to make a request of the king. So we're going to see how that all plays out in the upcoming chapter. So that is chapter 6, a great chapter in the Bible. For our application today, this chapter is one of the best and the clearest displays of the providence of God in, I think, really the entire Bible. When we speak about providence, usually we aren't referring to something that's obviously miraculous, but rather to an event where God steers the situation through the natural elements of the world. It's not observably supernatural, but it's obviously God-directed. Esther and Mordecai's story is obviously intended to be understood as God-directed. You've got the feasts of Esther, the uncovering of the plot by Mordecai, the reward that Mordecai gets, the sleepless night of the king, the specific book that's read to the king that night, and the failed plot of Haman. All of these were organized and ordered with precision on God's timeline. This makes it all the more interesting that God is actually never mentioned in the book of Esther. And the first time I heard that, I couldn't believe it. But if you look through the pages of Esther, you won't find the term God anywhere in the book. Yet, that doesn't mean that God wasn't present. He was very much present, even though he didn't announce himself. And for application, I hope that this book gives us confidence that God is working in our lives, even though he doesn't always announce himself, even though he's not always there, in a supernaturally observable way or some way like that. When God works in our lives providentially, there isn't always a voice from heaven that announces what specific action God took. But just as in the story of Esther, we can be confident that he is working amongst us and that he will work all things for the good of his people.